Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to Broadcasting Scotland and this week's Full Scottish. My name is Euan Hughes. On this week's programme, we are delighted to be joined by Stephen Bonnar, the newly elected MSP for Uddingston and Bellshill. Good afternoon, Stephen, how are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. And we're also delighted to be welcomed by William Duguid. Good afternoon, William, how are you?
Hi, and welcome from not-so-sunny Bridge of Erne.
To start today's show, we'll begin with our Ukrainian update. Ukraine fired hundreds of drones at Russia early on Saturday, setting an oil depot ablaze on the final day of Russia's flagship economic forum in St. Petersburg. Many of the drones targeted St. Petersburg itself. The second Ukrainian attack on the city in less than a week, with Ukraine's SBU security services saying it had hit a naval base. More than 140 drones were shot down over the Leningrad region, which surrounds St. Petersburg. Governor Alexander Drozenko said the city's government, Alexander Beglov, issued a rare call for the residents to stay indoors during the attack. Russia's defense ministry has said that Russian air defenses intercepted a total of 376 drones across Russia. Ukraine's SBU said it had targeted St. Petersburg Kronstadt naval base, as well as the Russian Navy's 15th arsenal in the Leningrad region. President Zelensky described the strikes as a just response to Russian aggression against Ukraine. Russia renewed its strikes on Ukraine earlier on Saturday. A Russian drone killed a 64-year-old man in the southern Mykolaiv region, while a strike on the nearby Zaporizhia region wounded a 10-year-old boy and his father, regional authorities said. Russian drone and artillery attacks in Ukraine's central Dnipropetrovsk region killed one and left three others wounded, according to the regional governor, Alexander Ganza. Russian forces also attacked two civilian search and rescue vessels in Ukrainian waters, causing injuries. Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister, Oleksiy Kuleba, said on Saturday. Keir Starmer will host Zelensky, Emmanuel Macron, Friedrich Merz for talks in Downing Street today to discuss the support for Ukraine. The meeting comes after a week of heightened hostilities and Vladimir Putin's rejection of Zelensky's proposal of face-to-face talks with Russia. We're now going to move on to our Middle Eastern update. 951 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza since the start of October 2025 ceasefire, bringing the total number of Palestinians killed in Gaza since October 7, 2023 to 72,961. In the West Bank, Israeli aggression has been growing, with settlers and IDF attacking and bulldozing Palestinian farms and homes. A 7-month-old baby was killed when the soldiers fired into his parents' car and was stopped by an IDF patrol. William, following Trump's recent attacks on Netanyahu, do you think there's signs of growing divisions between the US and Israel over the Middle East?
Well, I think that what Israel is currently doing in Lebanon is probably working against the possibility of there being peace in the Middle East. And Trump's reputation, to a certain extent, is actually very difficult to sort of establish any sort of reputation when nothing he says can be trusted, but let that aside. His reputation depends on perhaps delivering some sort of peace to reverse out of the sort of trouble he's caused by getting involved there. The thing is that with Trump, you never quite know. I mean, there are reports of a furious row with Benjamin Netanyahu because it was causing trouble for the process. But the process is in trouble anyway. We're not getting from Donald Trump an honest assessment of what's going on to finish this war. And it's really beginning to hit the American economy and by extension the world economy. And it's a totally destabilizing influence on the world. So where it will go from here, I don't know. They may well make peace again. It may prove to be something that begins to move things towards a resolution. You see, the other side of the coin we have is that the US and the Israeli military appear to be getting even more entwined with one another. So that perhaps suggests that support for Israel will only grow from the United States, and that is not a particularly enticing prospect, I've got to say.
Stephen, what are your thoughts on this?
It's just so utterly depressing, the whole situation. I think from our way back to October 23, the results of that, which was obviously a catastrophic thing in the first place, but the response to that, and then the inconsistencies coming from Donald Trump and from Benjamin Netanyahu is just that lead into a desperate humanitarian crisis. It was, of course, confined to Gaza and the West Bank, but it's not now. It's in Iran, it's in Lebanon, and this war and destruction is just utterly depressing. And President Trump has clearly underestimated the kind of will of the Iranian people. I think that's clear to see. It's a horrible regime in Iran. Nobody is disputing that. But you don't bomb your way to peace. You can't bomb your way to peace. That has long been established, and it's just utterly devastating when you hear some of the figures that you rhymed off yourself there in the beginning, Euan. There is an ongoing genocide. There is ongoing devastation. Innocents are being brutalised. Innocents' lives are being lost. And I just do not see how we come together until... I just don't see how we see a way out of this until Trump manages to find a solution that he can exit, that lets him save face. But as my colleague there said, it's starting to hit in the American pocket. And that's what might see some action in the end, because we know that that's Trump's language. Money is his language, nothing else. Lives clearly do not matter to the man.
Going back to your point of coming together, do you think that the international community has to do more to stop the worsening situation unfolding?
Absolutely. I think we need to do more at home. We need to do more across Europe, and we need to do more more diplomacy across the world, because what we're doing right now is not having the correct impact. What's really focusing the mind of world leaders is the rising costs of fuel, oil, with the Strait of Hormuz being closed. So that's the issues that make the people, the leaders listen, but the people, they're seeing the devastation. They're seeing the lives lost. They're seeing the anti-human acts that we are now witnessing and have been for a couple of years now, and there just does not seem to be any end to it. And the problem is that we have further distractions. We have the ongoing situation in Ukraine. We have the ongoing situation in the Middle East, which was bad enough before Israel wanted to then go and extend that into the Lebanon and other things. And absolutely, diplomacy is the way forward. But we need to be doing far more across the world.
William, do you see any resolution coming in the next few weeks, months, years even?
Hopefully shorter time than years. The difficulty the whole world is beginning just to grapple with now is the fact that the American leadership position within the world, in terms of world affairs and in terms of how things go, is a busted flush. Right now, America can no longer be trusted to be anything other than clear and present danger to the security of the world. And therefore, it's for the rest of the world, for Europe, for Canada, for others, to step up and fill the gap if they possibly can, but certainly do what they can to maintain stability. Now, that has been happening with Ukraine, where Europe has stepped up with providing Ukraine with the funding and the support that the Americans have basically stopped. And the same is true of the Middle East. There needs to be a leadership role for the rest of the world, but we are still developing that. And we need to be pretty rapid about developing, I would suggest, because right now with the US, even if the midterms go the Democrats' way, and let's say the Democrats get in a couple of years' time, we don't know whether another MAGA-type government's coming down the pipe in another 4 years. So, as I say, American leadership, now it's gone. It's just beginning to disintegrate, and something new will have to take its place.
Thank you. And moving on to the far-right racist attacks and the disrespect of the family of Henry Nowak. Despite Mark Nowak's pleas that his son's murder should not be used for division and hate, Farage and the far-right hijacked his killing to escalate disinformation and ramp up racist rhetoric, leading to violence on the streets and in Southampton. And US Vice President JD Vance joined in the debate. Stephen, how do you react to Farage's response to the murder of Henry Nowak?
entirely predictable, unfortunately, Ewan, despite the calls from the Novak family, who I must admire their strength and courage at this time. And of course, all our thoughts are with the Novak family at this time. But yeah, Farage, the far right, of course, they were going to try and utilise this, as they always do, egged on by commentators out with our own country, like Mr. Musk in particular. So yeah, the reaction. I mean, I watched Mr. Novak. Mark this morning on the Koonsberg show, and again shown great dignity and recalling for those calls not to stir up hate and division within our communities. And then 2 minutes later, Zia Yousaf was on, and he was refusing to condone the calls of Farage, and the kind of language being used is clearly to stir up tensions, to stir up division in the area, and I think it is just utterly disgusting.
Thank you. Stephen, William, what are your thoughts on this, Farage's response to the murder of Penny Nowak?
I totally agree with Stephen. I saw the Laura Koonsberg show as well, and I saw Zia Yousaf come on and basically just drive a coach and horses through everything. This has been weaponized by Reform so as to gain influence with the people who tend to support. Well, they want change. This is change, and anything that Reform can get hold of that will bring these people along, they will go for. And it's just naked opportunism on Reform's part. I think that Mark Novak and his family have been incredibly dignified and have even repeated their wish for this not to be a cause for disturbance or rage. There needs to be an absolute understanding of what went wrong with the situation. And that needs to be done with cool heads. It does not need to be done with cold rage. But the fact of the matter is that despite Zia Yousaf's protestations this morning, Reform does not care what happens with this. If only they can use it to stir up trouble, that's enough for them. And the sooner that the public rumbles what's going on and decent people see to voting them out of whatever they've been voted into, that's a problem you're going to continue to have.
Going back to obviously you quoted Nigel Farage saying it should be met with cold rage. Do you think that that kind of rhetoric? Do you think that kind of rhetoric drove the violence in Southampton?
I think it very probably did. Yes, the violence may have happened anyway because there are forces now going on, and then Stephen mentioned agitators from outside the country, and that's been a factor for quite some time. So yeah, none of it is helpful. And the one thing that all parties need to be, and actually most of the parties at Westminster and at home in Holyrood when they've spoken about it, have been fairly helpful and have actually put out a sort of line of how to deal with this that actually works. Reform are the only ones really interested in exploiting it. Reform and those even further to the right than Reform, such as Restore Britain, Rupert Lowe's group. The rhetoric helps no one except the people that want to change things for the worse in this country and gain influence.
Thank you. Stephen, do you think that there's any validity to the claims of two-tier policing in England? Why does this claim keep coming up again and again?
Yeah, I mean, I don't focus so much on English policing, I'll be particularly honest, but I think some of the cases over the last while have certainly caused concern and have raised the voice of that argument due to some of the things that we have witnessed. I think obviously police forces across these islands have all recently come out and accepted and acknowledged that there is institutional racism, there is sexism, discriminatory behaviours going on within our police forces. That's been acknowledged right across the islands, and we must ensure that we are continuous in our meticulous checking to ensure that that this kind of two-tier policing system is not allowed to happen.
Thank you. William, what do you think of this, the two-tier police claim? Why does it keep coming up again and again?
Well, I mean, I think it's reasonably clear that the way things were being done was biased in its effect and tended to provide worse outcomes for minorities of whatever sort. And therefore, what was being sought with how things are done by the police now is equality of outcome. And that has been approached in a fairly nuanced way from what I can tell. Sometimes it looks like a bit of a word salad, and it could maybe do with clarity. But it means not treating people absolutely the same in certain circumstances, you might think, and they might be to do with religious outlook and how you deal with that, what you say, just how you react to the situation. However, there are some fundamentals that should certainly either be written into the regulations or be understood by all police officers, and that is that when you come to a situation where the complainant is standing and obviously quite healthy, and the apparent attacker is lying on the ground, yes, I know there's a possibility that that may be subterfuge in order to get out of it, but actually the overwhelming likelihood is that he's actually injured. And maybe you just need to deal with that rather than making any sort of assumptions about anything else. That should be one of the prime things. It should be an overriding factor. And maybe that should just be better understood. I can quite understand what the nuanced language is all about, but it does allow political operators to tag it as two-tier policing. And it's not by any means as simple as that. And it's quite a complex situation. But I think the Novak incident was a bad error on behalf of the police, but it wasn't necessarily more than that.
Mm-hmm. So would you say that maybe regarding police training, there might need to be an overhaul to kind of alleviate situations like that from happening again?
I think that would be said. I think there needs to be dialogue, and there needs to be helpful dialogue, and it would be better if it wasn't inflamed by political operators. And I think that needs to happen quite soon, because now we need to, dumb down the tension, but make things a wee bit more just peaceful for a while we discover what it is we need to do, or even calm things down. Yeah.
And Stephen, just to wrap up the Henry Nowak case, what do you think about that, about the police perhaps being overhauled to alleviate situations like that?
Well, I think there should always be checks and balances in place, and after every investigation of this nature, and I think that continuous improvement is something that we should all be striving for. And I think also, particularly where police forces are concerned, where mistakes are made, that they're accepted, that their hands are held up, and that we learn from the mistakes. There has been too much at times a culture where there seems to be the police looking to cover for the police themselves, and to perhaps not allow negative press to get out. I think we can all be guilty of that as well across business, whether it be civic charities and whatever else. So I think where there is issues, we need to bring them to the fore, we need to accept them, and we need to work through them. That's the only way that the public will regain the trust of the police. And of course, we have policing by consent in this country, and that's what we need to ensure that we're looking to maintain as well. And we need to do that by continuous improvement, by continuous checks and balances, and making sure that everybody is treated fairly when they come to engage with our police services.
Thank you both for your comments on that. Moving on to the Peter Mandelson Files and the recent revelations this week. The Peter Mandelson Files were released this week despite deleted WhatsApp messages and redactions. The details were damning, and questions have been raised about his ties, Peter Mandelson's, to Russia and China, and put the spotlight on the UK Scotland Secretary, Douglas Alexander, over the undeclared meetings with lobbyists. Stephen, how embarrassing do you think these revelations are for Keir Starmer and his government?
Well, the whole affair has been quite something. If it's not embarrassing for Keir Starmer, it should be. I think it's been embarrassing for the whole UK political system. To have this man selected, given what was known long before his selection and elevation to the highest diplomatic office in the United Kingdom, his continuous relationship with a convicted paedophile, probably the world's most known convicted paedophile, was already known to Mr. Starmer. He's put his hands up for that and apologised. I don't think that's enough in the first instance. And then from that, we have just had embarrassment after embarrassment, and revelation after revelation in terms of the coziness of some of these Labour MPs with Mandelson, in terms of the messages, now, of course, deleted, with the use of disappearing messages. We've had Darren Jones recently, we've had Douglas Alexander as well. I think Darren Jones actually messaged Mandelson on the day that he was sacked from his position and to apologise and say that he was doing a great job. So I think some of these revelations, embarrassing, they should be well beyond embarrassing, Euan.
Thank you. William, what do you think of this?
I think transparency in government is extremely important, and that's exactly what we're seeing the lack of here. Disappearing WhatsApp messages are one thing, but also the closeness of contacts and a meeting that took place, I think, 18 months or something before it actually appeared on the record. The reason that people lack faith in politicians right now is exactly this sort of thing, and it can be so easily avoided by just doing the right thing. If the meeting takes place, you record it, and you make sure that any record of it is available to those who need to see it, to check that there hasn't been something done that's out of order. And it's not just this current government that does it, that all sorts of governments do it. They make this sort of mistake and they move away from transparency, and we need to make that the solid rule. One of the things we absolutely have to do in this country, and this is true of Scotland as much as the UK, is to build up faith in politicians and in the political system, and in the political system to do things right and not to do things in secretive and damaging ways. If you just look at the turnout in the Scottish election compared to in 2021, that gives you an idea of where politics sits in people's estimation. And looking forward to our future as a country and possibly as an independent nation, we absolutely have to build up levels of trust in the people we choose to represent us. So it's a systematic or systemic problem, and it needs to be fixed. And I'm not quite sure, apart from people actually adopting good practice for a change, how it's going to be fixed. Maybe this will be the spur that makes it happen, but I tend to doubt it.
And do you think that Douglas Alexander has questions to answer over his ties to Peter Mandelson, William?
I think he does. I mean, the meeting in question was when he was Trade Secretary, I believe, and it was with Global Counsel, which Mandelson, of course, stepped back from, but remains a shareholder of. He stepped back in 2024 when the election result happened. But the closeness of the tie, the ties go far back before that, because in his way, as a much younger man, Douglas Alexander was one of the up-and-coming Labour folks, and a bit of a fixer himself. He was the strategist behind the 2001 election, and it's easy to see how he might have seen somebody like Peter Mandelson as a kind of mentor, which would explain the closeness of the relationship. And that seems to have gone on. And so I think there are definitely questions to answer. It doesn't necessarily mean that Douglas Alexander himself has been mixed up in anything that Mandelson has been mixed up in. But the ties of Global Counsel to China and Russia, and the lack of transparency, and a mistake that happens to go just with this. No, it doesn't. It's a mistake that happens far too often. Transparency is important, and every government minister needs to be looking at that. So yes, Douglas Alexander should be asking questions, and he shouldn't be shrugging them off, that's for sure.
Thank you. And Stephen, what do you think about this?
Yeah, well, I think we need to clearly establish, there's checks and balances in place for ministers in terms of their declarations. So I think we need to establish if we've broken the ministerial code first and foremost. And I was just allowed myself a wee smirk there when I heard William saying he kind of masterminded some previous elections. He was also, if you believe reports, masterminded Sarwar's Judas kiss to Keir Starmer, which obviously didn't work the way it was intended. And I think he was the strategist behind that latest Holyrood election, where Labour were absolutely rumped in the election results. So I think probably there's a few people within the Labour Party that would like to ask some questions of Douglas Alexander as well. But, to come back to the main point, I think there is serious questions to be answered here in terms of transparency, in terms of the ministerial obligations, and so therefore I think we should be right. And I think the SNP's Westminster leader Dave Duggan has called for the ethics advisor to have a look at this, and I think that would a right course of action.
Thank you. And Stephen, what should be the remit of any inquiry into Peter Mandelson connections to Epstein and his appointments as the US ambassador? And should it include any lobbying of UK government ministers?
Yes, it absolutely should. And I think we should look at all and any correspondence on behalf of the people of the United Kingdom in terms of trade, in terms of any other kind of regulatory frameworks that were maybe being put in place. So yeah, I think we should be having a look, because when this goes right to the very top of the British establishment, when you have lords and princes that are divulging highly sensitive information to people out with and people who have no right to have that information, and that seems to be based on no more than a friendship, we're to believe, then yes, I think we should be looking to just see how much dishonesty was happening there, how much treason was potentially happening there, and how much dishonesty, how much of that dishonesty was known at the higher echelons of the UK government.
Thank you. William, what are your thoughts on this?
I pretty well agree with Stephen. We just need to move towards more transparency generally, and if we can have a proper inquiry into what's gone on here, we might start to do it. We need to be looking at all sorts of things in which Douglas Alexander has been involved, not least his quashing of Scottish aspirations over the years, which he's used the role of the Scottish Secretary to do, and how Mandelson might have had an influence on that. And of course, yes, the wider contacts as well. We need a clearing of the house. We seem to periodically have these incidents, and then a lot is said, but nothing actually happens. I think we actually need action this time. It gets back to my point earlier that people have such lack of trust in the political system that we really need to be revising the whole way we do things in order that we can feel that we're proper participants in a democracy again, rather than just being shills for folks that are either careerists or making money out of it.
So, just completely changing the way that MPs are more transparent. Is that what you're saying? Just making sure that
yes,
yeah, yep.
Follow the rules to start with, but let's make the rules robust anyway. That
Thank
then follow.
Thank you both for your opinions on that. So now we need to move on to Ofcom's decision on STV. This week, Ofcom gave STV the go-ahead to cut its North East news programme. There have been growing concerns about the effectiveness of Ofcom regulation, with disquiet over an alleged lack of challenge to GB News. Stephen, what does Ofcom's approval of STV's request to close down the North East newsroom mean for Scottish broadcasting?
I think it's obviously devastating for broadcasting in general. There'll be jobs lost there. We always want to avoid that wherever possible. And I just think it's a really disappointing decision, not less so because of the respondents to Ofcom's kind of consultation process. Like, it was overwhelmingly people were against this decision, and Ofcom have simply rejected the voices of the local people and backed the broadcaster to close down its operation in and off of Scotland, which, as I sit here in West Central Scotland where everything is often centred, I think it's a really disappointing decision. I think my colleagues in the north of Scotland are continuing to push with STV and and Ofcom to see if anything can be done. But I think just overall, bringing people localised news is really important, considering when you look at our main national broadcasters and how often kind of anti-Scottish the news reporting can tend to be. I think this is a devastating impact, and it will have a devastating impact on what is a very bad decision.
Thank you. William, what are your thoughts on this?
Again, I agree with Stephen. Local broadcasting is important. It really is. And the Europeans do it much, much better than we do. There are many local TV stations. Some of them, right enough, are struggling for money and they're on their uppers a wee bit, and they have various ways in which to fund themselves. But they manage to survive and exist even with small audiences, and that is important. If your broadcaster isn't saying anything to you that really means anything to you because it doesn't reflect who you are and where you are, that is a problem. And things used to be a lot better with STV back when we had STV and Grampian. And of course, the North of Scotland STV broadcast is the legacy of the old Grampian television. That was a bit more reflective, not as reflective as it might have been, because there's an argument for there having been something for the Highlands and Islands, the islands as well as the Highlands, I mean. But nevertheless, it was more reflective at that time of what we were. Now, I understand that it's not just going to be a complete write-off in a single bulletin monolithically coming out of Glasgow. I think it's going to be 70% the same, and then there's going to be some variation with satellite places chipping in the other 30% or so of supposedly local news. But you won't be getting the in-depth discussions that you would be getting with a dedicated news service for the area. And therefore, yes, it is a tragedy, and it puts us further behind where we are with Europe. And of course, it's money that's the main thing. And probably it was the thing that Ofcom couldn't stand against. STV are needing to save money, and that shouldn't be the case. We should have properly funded broadcasters, but it unfortunately is the case. But we'll see what happens, but it's very, very disappointing, particularly since the consultation was almost universally against doing this, and yet here we are again with something that we've had that we're no longer quite going to have, and it's things getting worse, and we need to start looking at a country where things start getting better, and broadcasting is undoubtedly one of them.
Thank you. And a lot of attention has came on remote communities like the Highlands and Islands. Do you think that the closure of this North-East newsroom, do you think that will marginalise them with respect to how remote that they actually are?
Yes, I think it will. And they already feel marginalised by all sorts of factors. And this will only exacerbate it. And it's such a shame because there's so much going on there and they have so much to contribute. And yet we have already, I would, not everybody agrees with this, but I do think we have a strong central belt bias within Scotland that's almost a counterpart of the southeast of England bias within the UK as a whole. And we're not paying due attention to what's going on in what's absolutely a fabulous, complex country with all sorts of areas having things to offer. So we need to break out of that, and this doesn't help us one little bit.
Thank you. And Stephen, are you concerned about how this might marginalise remote communities within Scotland?
Yeah, there's always these concerns of people feeling the disconnect. We're going to see, we'll remember a short time ago that the analogue station was being switched off. And a lot of people were concerned. How will they get their television? How will they get their news? How will they find out what's going on? We're now at the stage where they're actually going to turn off the Freeview service because things are evolving and we need to accept it. Things are evolving and how people digest their news is also avoided. However, in these remoter communities, there is no question that they already feel often ostracised and marginalised. I concur with what William said about the kind of the perception of a kind of West Central Scotland bias when a lot of these things take place. So anything that is taking services away is ultimately going to further marginalise and further disconnect people. So that's why I'm more concerned about it, and that's why the SNP will keep making the representations that we need to make in this department.
Thank you. William, the SNP have highlighted that the approval of the closures was made by a Westminster TV regulator. Do you think that decisions about Scottish broadcasting should be made in Scotland?
Do you mean I think broadcasting should either be devolved to Scotland or that it should become independent and have control over it anyway? Yes, undoubtedly. Of course, it is the one thing if you are wanting to perpetuate the existing system, if you're in Westminster doing that. Broadcasting is one of the things you will absolutely not devolve to Scotland, and that's the shocker. And as a result, we are probably as poorly served a population in terms of broadcasting as any population in Europe. I mentioned all the proliferation of local TV stations within Europe. The UK is pretty bad overall for that. I mean, Europe has about 4,000 local TV stations. The UK as a whole has 34. And within that, Scotland is particularly badly served. So absolutely, we need control over broadcasting, and we need also those independent broadcasters that do exist. We need to support them as best we can. Not always easy when there's not much money floating about, but nevertheless, the more we support, the more we're likely to be able to reach a situation where it gets built up. But a lot has to change. It really does. It's not satisfactory as it stands.
Thank you. And Stephen, what are your thoughts on this? Should decisions about Scottish broadcast be made in Scotland?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're about to approach very soon the World Cup. We're all very excited. We will notice the disparity in the reporting as we all as a nation watch the World Cup distributed from BBC and ITV, and we'll see the kind of distinct lack of coverage, the distinct lack of discussion after match time, as opposed to our other neighbours within the United Kingdom when their matches are being broadcast. We're paying the same a licence fee, we're paying for the same service, we're not receiving the same opportunities or service as well. So I agree that we need to get our independence, which will allow us independent broadcasting. And, you know, I have family in Ireland, I'm very au fait with their broadcasting services and radio, television, Iran. They have their difficulties, but they provide fantastic array of programmes, both in Irish and in English. We need to really get better in that regard as well here in Scotland, when we know there's a determination to do that from within government. But yes, local news, local broadcasting is going to be really important because it will further rejuvenate our local arts or services as well when we can put on dedicated Scottish shows. And I think that, you know, over the last 20, 30 years, how well radio and television Erin has developed, you know, that is certainly the direction of travel that we should be looking to take here in Scotland.
Thank you. And moving on to the by-elections, well, the UK media has been focused on Makerfield. There are also by-elections in Scotland. It's in Aberdeen South, Arbroath and Broughty Ferry constituencies. Stephen, in light of the blanket coverage of Peter Murrell's conviction across the Scottish media and the Makerfield by-election dominating UK media, it might be easier to forget that there are by-elections in Aberdeen South, Arbroath and Broughton Ferry. What is this lacking media coverage mean for Scottish by-elections?
more of the same, doesn't it? This is long established, particularly when there is some by-elections taking place in other parts of the UK around about the same team. However, make no mistake, we here in Scotland are very focused on these by-elections, particularly in Dundee and up in Aberdeen. Really kind of interesting things going on there, particularly in the North East, as we know, in terms of the energy situation, Reform looking to make. And I've even seen some commentary whereby some Conservatives believe that Reform should step back to allow them to be the main challenger to the SNP. So that means that they're worried. We're focused. We have some fantastic candidates in Richard Thompson and Lara Bird down in Dundee and Broughty Ferry. So we're focused. Oh, excuse me. Oh, because I would have to mention all of them. But yeah, so we're really focused on these by-elections. I'm looking forward to get up myself with my local campaign team here from Uddingston and Bellshill. We'll be up in Aberdeen next week. But yeah, our focus is very much on them. Of course, all the focus in the UK is on Andy Burnham's quest to be the new Prime Minister.
Thank you. And William, what are your thoughts on this? What do you think the lack in media coverage for the Scottish by-election will mean for this election?
I think it'll mean a low turnout, and low turnouts aren't a great thing. Firstly, because it's good that the population engages with elections, and we need to get used in Scotland to engaging with elections because, certainly in terms of my own campaigning with Perth Hub for independence, I would like the Scottish population to be engaged in its future, and if they're not turning up to elections, that's not a good starting point. So I think inevitably the turnout will be depressed by the lack of media coverage, and it'll be down really to the strength of the campaigning in these individual seats where I dare say there is a lot of effort going in. I've seen the effort that goes in around Perth to by-elections and other elections when they happen. I would hope that there would be enough to bring some people out. But, it's very difficult to be electing people if you're getting maybe a 30% or even 40% turnout rather than well above 50. It would be great if we were getting turnouts of 70 or 80% or even more. But I guess we have what we have.
And do you think that Reform will put much focus on these elections, or do you think they'll just focus entirely on the Makerfield election?
Reform have the resources, I suspect, to throw their weight at just about anything anyway. That's the one thing they've got. They're one of the best funded parties because of all the backers they have. So they will be a bit of a factor, one would think. It is true to say at the moment that the polling seems to suggest, I take it I'm able to say this without mentioning all the parties, the polling from electoral calculus right now would seem to suggest that the SNP remain favourites for each of the two seats. And I suppose you could also say that if it's previously been an SNP seat won in 2024, that's by definition one of the areas where the SNP is stronger. Of course, there is the issue of new candidates, whether they're well known or not, taking the place of well known previous candidates. But it looks like an interesting campaign in each case. I just hope that it does get locally the support and the recognition that it deserves.
Thank you, William. Stephen, with obviously Labour in the Scottish parliamentary elections, they didn't do as well as they might hoped. Do you think that Labour might be a challenger to the SNP, or do you think it will be mostly like Reform?
You mean in the by-elections alone?
Aye, just the Scottish ones, yeah.
Yeah. I think particularly in the North East, it will be potentially a three-way fight between the SNP, Conservatives and Reform. I think that's kind of traditionally fought out between ourselves and the Conservatives up there, but of course they've not had their troubles to seek electorally either, being reduced quite dramatically in the Holyrood election just past. So yeah, I mean, we'll not be focusing on it, who the opponents are. We will be focusing on our offer to the people of the North East. We believe that Scotland's bonanza of oil and gas has not worked for the people of Scotland, particularly so for the people in the North East. We can't allow that to happen with our renewables potential. I don't think that we want to have reform getting our hands on that. We think that is the major prize of Reform UK from a Westminster perspective, is to get control of Scotland's energy, and we will be making sure that we have every resource we possibly can focused to ensure that does not happen.
Thank you. And William, what are your thoughts on this?
I think it's Labour's not doing great at the minute, and certainly I suspect that will continue in Aberdeen South, which is not a natural Labour seat at all. In Arbroath and Broughty Ferry, they're doing slightly better than the Tories, according to the latest polling, but Reform are ahead of both of these, and at the moment the closest challengers to the SNP, but a long way behind. Now, a lot can change, and not least it can change because of the discussions that have been going on in the media about Peter Murrell and all that sort of thing over the last week. That said, it's also true to say, and I may be sort of going on to the next story accidentally here, but it does seem to be noticeable that, in fact, in terms of the support for the SNP, it's, if anything, been strengthened by those events. And certainly financial donations to the SNP have gone up. So I don't actually necessarily think it will be that much of a problem for the SNP in these two seats either. But we will know for sure, of course, in about 11 days' time.
Stephen, do you think the SNP has a good chance of winning the Scottish by-elections? Are you quite confident about it?
Never confident, never overconfident, but we are certainly, the polls, as William has already outlined, that our vote is holding up in these areas. We had obviously just delivered, which in anybody's language is a landslide at the Holyrood election. So, we are entirely focused under the leadership of John Swinney of bringing back that confidence in the government that my colleague William was talking about earlier on in the show. I think he was right when he said that, and I think under John Swinney's leadership, that is beginning to kind of bear fruit for the SNP. These two by-elections will be pivotal. We are absolutely determined to hold on to the seats that were obviously vacated from two colleagues now coming to join myself in Holyrood, and we want to maintain the strong voice for the SNP in these two areas. So we are entirely focused, we're entirely committed on delivering wins for the SNP.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I know we talked about this before, but going back to the Makerfield, William, do you think that because obviously both elections are very similar timing, do you think the Makerfield, if let's say Reform do well, do you think that might sway voters in Scotland at all?
Actually, I don't think it particularly will. I think Reform does have a strong enough base in Scotland, but it's, generally speaking, it's roughly, I would say, 10 percentage points below what you see in England. And also, I just believe the whole debate is different within Scotland to within England. There are quite considerable differences. And that was reflected, even though Reform are the joint second biggest party at Holyrood, they are a long way behind. So the Makerfield one has got special circumstances anyway because of Andy Burnham and a lot of resource from Reform's apparently limitless resources will be poured into stopping Andy Burnham. So I don't think it will have much effect, and I think it will be local things. I think, for example, in Aberdeen it's going to be farmers and fishermen, that sort of thing. And Arbroath and Broughty Ferry, well, carrying on what's been going on before. He said, not having researched the local issues properly. Whoops. So not a great answer, but there you have it.
Thank you. And do you, Stephen? Do you just wrap up? Do you agree with William on that point?
Yeah, I do. I think Reform undoubtedly have resources. I don't think any other parties get donors willing to hand over £5 million just like that. So they have the resources. They will be throwing I'm sure the kitchen sink at the seats that they can, but ultimately it's Labour v Labour in Makerfield, isn't it? Because we have to vote for Andy Burnham to allow him to then replace Labour. So vote Labour to stop Labour seems like a very good message that I'm sure that the people of Makerfield will be thinking very carefully about.
That's perfect. Thank you very much. And going on to our last topic today, it's about Farage as PM or Scottish independence. With a new poll showing 48% of Scots want an independence referendum within 5 years, and the SNP favourability growing, is the choice for Scotland, Farage or independence? Stephen, what are the risks to Scotland if Farage becomes the Prime Minister?
Well, to answer the initial point you made, it certainly seems to be shaping up that way, doesn't it? And I remember during the election campaign saying the same thing myself, that ultimately, you know, it was important that the strong SNP contingent was returned in Holyrood, because ultimately when this next general election comes along, the chances are that both the main Westminster parties are going to be rumped in the same way that they've been rumped at Holyrood. And ultimately, you know, that opens the door and hands the keys of number 10 to Nigel Farage. And I think that should send a shiver down the spine of every man, woman and child in Scotland.
Thank you. And William, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, first and foremost, I'm slightly disappointed that it's only 48% people want an independence referendum within the next 5 years. I would have hoped that over 50% might want one in the next 2 years or something. However, it doesn't necessarily mean the other 52 don't want it. Maybe they just don't know yet. Yes, I think it's very likely, but not absolutely certain, that reform will sweep the board in the UK elections whenever they happen. The first thing is a lot of us within the independence movement are looking at the next 2 to 3 year period as a key time to be pushing for independence. And one of the problems with that is simply the question of timing, because at the moment Labour have got a large majority, and they need to work out how best to use that majority to get in next time, or have the best chance of getting in next time. And that may mean going sooner rather than later. It's quite common for governments with large majorities not to do the full 5 years. So we could find ourselves with the UK election somewhat sooner than we expect, with all the dangers that entails. And it's really up to the independence movement, along with the SNP, to be doing its thing, but not necessarily depending on any of the plans that there might be working. The independence movement has got to pull itself together and to stop all the internal tensions that are undoubtedly happening with so many different groups, with so many different things getting in each other's way to an extent. And as a result, general support within the population for actual campaigning for independence, even if they have support for independence, the general public isn't really switched on to any campaigning for independence. And the movement needs to fix that. The movement needs to actually mount something that people will get behind, even if there isn't an absolute date for when it's going to be, and then push for it. Because yes, there is a danger, a very big danger, that Farage will be our Prime Minister after the next election. And if that happens, okay, it may be the catalyst that then propels Scotland somehow out of the United Kingdom, but more likely it's going to mean the emasculation or destruction of government at Holyrood and being brought back under the UK yoke completely and utterly. And that will set us back 20 to 30 years. We absolutely don't want that, and we need to do what we can to avoid it.
And do you think support for independence would shift at all if an official referendum was actually called?
I think it would, or at least it could be made to, because you could then... People always say, we need a date before we can get behind it. And presumably that's because they don't want to throw their energies into something that's got an endless process with no end in sight. So yes, a date would do that. I think that's actually quite unlikely, because it was impressive and very depressing how quickly Keir Starmer poo-pooed the idea of a referendum immediately following the Scottish election. It was something like 12 minutes, as I recall. Now, John Swinney will have other conversations. He'll have conversations with Keir Starmer, and he'll have conversations with the Celtic Alliance. And I am sure he does have a plan B up his sleeve. What I'm not sure about is whether that plan B will be enough to begin a process that will give people a date and get something that we can bring people behind. So it's we have to find a way to reinvigorate ourselves as a movement without necessarily having that date, even though, yeah, it's absolutely the case that a proper date would swing support behind independence, and we could then give them a real fright and maybe even just take it.
Thank you. And Stephen, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that support might shift if an official referendum is called?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I think it will shift, particularly in some of the communities that I represent. I know that there's still a real and present appetite for independence, although, life has got a lot more difficult for people since 2014 in terms of the implications of Brexit and the continuous wars that are obviously rising up our oil and gas prices, and the cost of living crisis is bitten so hard now that people can only focus day to day to make sure the survival of their families in many cases. However, you look at the turnout of the referendum, which was in the high 80s, and if you compare that with turnouts in the normal elections, whether it be Westminster, whether it be Holyrood, and of course even at council where we get an even lesser, and you could even argue where the more important elections because of some of the decisions that are making at local authority level in terms of the impacts on people's day-to-day lives. So I believe we'll be running a completely different campaign. There won't be as long a campaign as we had in 2014. I think there'll be some questions that we need to answer as an independence movement and as Scotland's largest independence party, the SNP, as well. So Mr Swinney, I'm sure, will be working on that. But what a very good starting point. We'll be starting from if 48% of the nation are keen to have that independence. We know we were starting in the low 20s in 2014, and I, for one, am full of beans and can't wait to get going for when that time comes. And I would like to ensure it is sooner rather than later for the issues that William outlined in terms of Mr Farage, in terms of his intentions when he does get control of Downing Street.
Thank you. And we've got about a minute left, so just a wee quick question, Stephen. If obviously Farage was to get into power and become the Prime Minister, and a Scottish independence referendum hadn't been called by that point, do you think that would sway voters in favour of voting for independence rather than obviously in the opposite of that?
I absolutely would. I thought that the Brexit referendum and the Brexit result and how Scotland was treated unfairly in the aftermath, I thought that would have moved the dial a wee bit further as well. I thought having Boris Johnson as our Prime Minister would have perhaps moved the dial a wee bit further and perhaps in a wee bit more kind of speedier fashion as well. But I think when we are staring down the barrel of a Farage government, then yes, I think that the people of Scotland will be clambering for that referendum.
Thank you very much. And it's just a wee note just to mention, since the candidates' names were mentioned, the candidates for this month's by-elections in Aberdeen South are Richard Gordon Thompson, Scottish National Party, Nural Hope Ali, Labour, Douglas Luston, Conservatives, Mel Sullivan, Liberal Democrats, George Shelton, Eckstein, Green Party, Joe Hart, Reform UK, and David Ballanite, Alliance for Democracy and Freedom. For the by-election in Arbroath and Broughty Ferry, the same day, the candidates are Lara Bird, SNP, Heather Doran, Labour, Jack Cruikshanks, Conservatives, Denvir Ahmed, Liberal Democrats, and Bill Reid for Reform UK. Both elections will take place on Thursday, the 18th of June. Well, that's it from us this week. Thank you, everyone, for the full Scottish. Before I go, I just want to remind you all that Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. To everyone who donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much, and we can only exist with your support. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford it, it's £5 a month. Please consider becoming a member of Broadcasting Scotland, and please donate whatever you can afford. Thank you. And thank you again to our guests, Stephen Bonnar and William Duguid. Thank you very much for taking our questions. Really appreciate it. Thank you, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for watching.